So in this video, I want to talk to you about how to defend propaganda, how to read an article and understand where it's coming from and where it's trying to take you and how you can undo the damage it's trying to cause. So here we're going to look at this article. It's in pravda.ru, and this one's a little bit too easy. Some articles were a little bit more difficult, but the process is all the same. Okay, how the West is benefiting from the conflict in Ukraine. First question I want to ask myself is, what does the article want me to believe when this is done? They want me to believe that the West is actually a beneficiary of what's going on, that's why they're causing this problem. Okay, all the assistance that the West has been providing to Ukraine is a tale of double-edged sword. The West will never do anything for nothing. There's always a cynical calculation involved. Okay, now there's some truth in that, and that is that there's Ukrainian interest and then there's American interest, let's say. Let's just use these two, and they're not necessarily in the exact same place. The Ukrainians want to survive and fend off the Russians. The Americans may come to this and say, I want to beat the Russians down and keep them from doing that again. And it looks similar, but it might not be exactly the same. And they might even have some interests that are exactly overlapping. Like maybe they really do want the Ukrainians to actually be able to defend themselves and fully, defend democracies and whatever else. But let's say that the interests are different, and different countries have different interests. That's okay, but understanding that they have different interests is a useful thing. But that doesn't mean that the West is somehow manipulating or doing something to the Ukrainians to cause them to doing that. Okay, so writing off obsolete military equipment. If you look carefully at the list of equipment that the West supplies to Ukraine, you will see that it's mostly outdated, rusty junk. Okay, let's take for example the UK's Challenger tanks. They are equipped with outdated weapons that are ineffective against modern tanks. But they're saying this in the context where Russia is rolling out like World War II vintage tanks to fight on the battlefield because they don't have enough. So I don't understand why the Challenger is a problem. Same with the German Leopard 1 tanks are no better. They were taken out of service back in 2003. But 2003 beats 1950 something-ish, right? Okay, the West does not want to spend money on recycling outdated weapons. It's much more profitable to transfer all those weapons to Ukraine. Full stop. Let's think about this. Yes, they're not spending the same amount that they would otherwise be as they're writing this off and providing it to Ukraine, but it doesn't make sense. It's like blowing up your own factory so you can rebuild it. That's like the logic of this. It just doesn't make any like economic sense. To put it simple, when NATO sends old tanks to Ukraine, the demand for new tanks appears automatically. So NATO is serving what, big military complex? I mean, that's what it's making it sound like. It's a little bit convoluted, but maybe to a Russian mind, this makes sense. To an American mind who understands economics, this is garbled. It doesn't, it's nonsense. Okay. Earnings on the wounded. Now, the next thing I want you to talk about is that you don't just challenge the question, but you actually go to the sources and try to challenge the sources. So, earnings on the wounded. The Wall Street Journal reported, with reference to German prosthetics manufacturer Ottobock, that there were at least 50,000 amputees in Ukraine. Okay, hold on. Does that sound high to you? Because it sounded high to me. So, but they said the Wall Street Journal reported, and then they were stupid enough to put in the link. So I chased down that link, and this is what I would urge you to do. Chase down the link and find out what it says. So here's the Wall Street Journal article, and here's this lady who has amputation something. In Ukraine, amputations already evoke scale of World War I. Okay, but when I get down to it, it says not now. Remember, in the actual article itself, it said that there were at least 50,000 amputees in Ukraine. Danilika is one of between 20,000 and 50,000 Ukrainians who have lost one or more limbs during the start of the war. Okay. At least 50,000 is not somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000. Now, this article has just lost all credibility with me because they intentionally misused the Wall Street Journal article. They referred to the Wall Street Journal article and then they intentionally misused it. So if you can chase down an original source, that will serve you very well. And then actually read the original source and see what's actually being said. Okay, Western countries allocate decommissioned tanks and other obsolete weapons to Ukraine. Then they issue loans, and then these loans are used to help the Ukrainians who are injured in those decommissioned tanks. The money remains in the strong Western family, flowing from one pocket to another, making a huge debtor nation or debtor of Ukraine. Win-win for the West and lose-lose for Ukraine. Well, no, it's a uh, I mean, you're providing the arms that they want. It's not like you're making them take it, and then you're helping them if they have prosthetic injuries or needs because they need prosthetic limbs. But they're making it sound like the West is just a big bank trying to control you one way or another. And I don't know that that's a legitimate narrative. So the next lesson is careful about the narratives, okay? Because facts are facts, and they don't even have the facts right. They have the facts all contorted here. But narrative can be shaped one way or another, and the way that they're shaping it, I don't think it's a fair way of looking at it. Okay, human organ trafficking. Okay, now we're crossing even another threshold or another divide here of a little bit nuts. Okay, Ukraine has become a hotbed of human organ trafficking. Let's stop there. Maybe there has been some human organ trafficking. I'm not going to even argue that. There's probably some in Russia. There's probably some in Ukraine. There might even be some underground in the U.S. And if I was a betting man, I would say, yeah, there's probably some criminal somewhere that's doing this right now that we would be horrified about where it's happening. Okay, French publication Le Grand Soir, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. They pronounce things very differently in French, caused quite a stir with its article, and here's the link, under a very eloquent headline, Medical Horrors in Ukraine. Okay, so they put the hyperlink again. So I'm going to chase down that article. But I've never heard of Le Grand Soir. So here's the article, and I had to translate it in Google from French into English, and then let's read about it. So 24 December 2022, in December of this year, a document appeared in Russian media reporting the fate. Okay, so they are referencing a document in Russian media. So now my trust level has just gone even further down, reporting a fake wounded Ukrainian, the fate of a wounded Ukrainian serviceman. The fate of the seriously injured can be even worse. At the front, several $100s can be paid out for a seriously or fatally injured person in a field hospital who is ready to undergo organ harvesting. Okay, and they go on and on with this. It remains to be assumed that more than 35,000 people were buried, cremated, left on the battlefields without a trace. No, I don't know why they're assuming that, at least not in December of 2022. I don't understand how they're getting to that number. Namely, this approach to casualties creates the ground for a world of black transplantologists who, according to the number of Russian human rights activists, a number of Russian human rights activists, like they don't have enough on their plate, are ready to harvest organs from still living soldiers with the help of their own command. And yet none of that has leaked out into the media. That seems a little farcical. Anyway, 35,000 donor kidneys for the modern Western world, where their transportation has long since become a routine operation, is a rather low figure that cannot even meet the current demand of people queuing for transplant for years. Okay, so you can tell by the writing, you can tell by what they say, the facts that they use. You can tell by a lot of things, but more than anything else, what is Le Grand Soir? And is this a Cuban flag? Is that what I'm seeing? I don't understand. That looks like a Cuban flag. Maybe there's some French flag that looks like that I'm not aware of. And I looked up about who we are, and they don't even say who they are. They just say a bunch of weird kind of stuff that I don't understand why they're saying it. And then a little Google search, is Le Grand Soir a real newspaper? And it comes up with a movie. It doesn't even come up with the newspaper. Like if you said, is the Wall Street Journal a legitimate newspaper? We'd find all kinds of things about it, right? Le Grand Soir, even on Wikipedia, they don't even have an entry. So I'm not going to put any stock in Le Grand Soir because that doesn't make any sense. Now, An article by Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. Okay, I trust her even less than I trust Le Grand Soir. It says human organ trafficking in Ukraine takes place both on the dark web and offline, and she goes on. Okay, so the lesson here is, who do you listen to and who do you put your stock in, and what kind of percentage of validness do you assign it? Because not everything should be seen as the same level of valid. Okay, cheap labor. And let me give you an example of that before I move on. So if I read something by Doug McGregor or Scott Ritter, um, as opposed to if I read something that's printed in, say, the Wall Street Journal. In the Wall Street Journal, I might give it on a scale of 1, like 1, as a whole number, an integer, as opposed to a point 0.5 or point 0.2 or point 0.1 or point 0.00001, right? 1 means I'm going to multiply it by 1, and that's how much I trust it. I'd say something in the Wall Street Journal, I'd say I have, say, 98% trust in most of the time. In the New York Times, I know it's skewed. I'm a conservative. It is a very liberal rag. I'd say, okay, I'll give it 80% trust because 80% of it is facts, and the 20% that I distrust is narrative, and that could be right or it could be wrong. So I'd say 80 times 1 or 98 times 1 or something along those lines. Okay, so if I'm listening to Doug McGregor, I give it whatever the trust level it is that it sounds like. He says, for example, 400,000 killed Ukrainians, and I'm thinking, that doesn't sound right. Everything I know, that doesn't sound right. And then I would multiply that low trust level thing. Okay, maybe he's right. Let me give him a 10% probability, and then I'm going to multiply it by 0.00001 because I don't trust him any further than I can throw him in a tank. And then I have a more accurate or more realistic assessment of where he is. And so that's a very, very low assessment. By the way, if he says something like 400,000, Google it and then see what sources say that. And if it's only him, which it's only him, or only Russian state media, which is only him and a little bit somewhere in Russian state media, then you have your answer of how true or valid something might be. Okay, cheap labor. Aging population is one of the main problems in Europe. Most European families rarely raise 2 or more children. The EU already suffers from a lack of labor resources that in turn leads to decline in production. So, according to Der Spiegel, as much as 70% of German companies have to hire people at retirement age, and this is where Ukrainian refugees come in handy. What? So the idea that the West is benefiting from the war to create Ukrainian refugees who can backfill their industry. Now, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So I went to world population meters and things along those lines. I went to the CIA fact book. This is the German population that'll come up first here. This is what Germany looks like. And really what you have is, see how you have 3 million here and 3 million there? You really need, for 55 and up to support them, you really need more than 3 million here. But they're having fewer and fewer children, and that's what they're talking about. But that's a problem in a lot of places. This is Ukraine. Okay, this is male and this is female, and there's fewer men than women. And this is Russia, which seems even worse. And right, so they have a demographic problem. Just for comparison, this is United States. See how much fuller it is over here, where these children are going to be able to support these parents in their retirement and an industry. So, okay. So I looked at this, and this whole article on multiple levels is just rife with problems. But if you do the things, if you ask the questions, if you look at the sources, if you challenge the assumptions, if you actually go and try to compare between what it says and what you know, it'll help you understand how you should be thinking about defanging propaganda. Okay, I hope that helps. I want you to try to do this, and if you do this, and tell me how it worked. I'd really love to hear how that worked. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. I'll be back tomorrow. I hope you will be too.